front seat to climate change. I'm your host, Dawar Hamid Bhatt. Before we get into today's episode, let's take a few moments to talk about the Breathe Pakistan International Conference. As you know, we held this conference this year for the first time, and Pakistan's very first international conference on climate change in February 2025. And the Dawn Media Group again plans to host the next one in April 2026. It's a gathering of like-minded individuals, government and policymakers, experts, and also activists and media journalists, everyone on the ground which reports on climate change. It was a moment of unity, especially for Pakistan, which is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. And it also laid down foundation for a vision to deal with the urgency of climate change and making Pakistan more climate resilient. At its heart was the declaration. This is a document that was compiled by talking to each individual involved in this conference and bringing together very diverse views on climate change. At its heart was a declaration: the Earth is living, it's an interconnected system, and human beings are just one part of its vast web of life. The conference called on citizens, governments, and international bodies to recognize that all forms of life, animals, plants, rivers, forests, oceans, have intrinsic value, rights, and dignity, regardless of their utility to humans. It urged a fundamental transformation of our legal, social, and moral orders from one of domination to one of reciprocity and restoration. Among the key demands, the recognition of nature's rights, including the rights of ecosystems to thrive and regenerate, stronger legal systems and climate codes to enforce ecological protections, accessible climate finance and investment in homegrown indigenous solutions, a shift to climate diplomacy led by the Global South both within itself and externally at the larger global sphere as well, and a new architecture of justice that sees climate action not just as policy goal, but a moral responsibility rooted in the reverence of all life. This declaration is a bold call to action, asserting that we cannot achieve climate justice without ecological justice, and protecting Earth's diversity is essential to protecting humanity itself. Now, let's get into today's episode. We've all heard of cities heating up, urban flooding, alluvial flooding, rivers getting washed away, houses getting washed away, people's lives impacted, displaced, in some cases, fatally wounded, injured, or, God forbid, losing their lives as well. Now, a lot of these events are, of course, physical in nature, the impacts are physical. But for thousands of people, or possibly millions in Pakistan, across the world as well, they leave an anxiety, an impact that is infecting the mental health of the global population. Today, we get together to discuss the mental health impacts of climate change. The term climate anxiety, and sometimes called eco-anxiety, is a growing form of mental illness. It's not officially recognized at this point and not as officially recognized medical disorder. But yet, psychologists are increasingly reporting that more and more people, especially of a younger demographic, are feeling its impacts, talking about it, and often concerned. And we see it visibly in terms of people coming to media to speak about it, online, social media, tweeting about it. And so the whole idea that people walk into their clinics feeling paralyzed and unable to do something about it, about the environment being impacted, climate impacts around their communities, this, in essence, has been dubbed climate anxiety. Anxiety shows up in many forms. Of course, we know that panic attacks, insomnia, irritability, fatigue are all already linked to anxiety. But when climate impacts people, it triggers it without realizing what is exactly behind this anxiety. Pakistan has faced a lot of climate impacts, extreme events in recent years. The floods of 2022 are just one example. Communities, millions displaced and losing their properties, their memories associated with houses, leaves a deep scar. Similarly, in the northern areas where glacier lake outburst floods have washed away villages, in many cases reduced agricultural arable land where their economic livelihoods are associated with, people also lose hope and get anxious because of that. And these are just very few examples. These extend to all our cities, which are impacted by air pollution. People now visibly get afraid of using the outdoors, especially in the smog season. Parents are afraid of sending their kids out for the fear of getting sick. Similarly, you have other regions in Pakistan which face extreme heat, and heat in itself impacts economic livelihoods. Again, people cannot work outdoors, especially the working class, and the loss of income. That anxiety, of course, can be linked to climate, making extreme heat more recurrent and over longer durations. And this is not just about the future or what is to come. This is happening in real time, especially for countries like Pakistan, in our communities. These impacts are felt on a daily basis. And that is why dealing with climate anxiety is becoming more and more important, especially from a public health perspective. Children in climate affected regions showing signs of trauma. Girls in particular have reported heightened fear and anxiety in the aftermath of floods. The adults are delaying life decisions, like having children, because they fear that future floods can impact their whole households, and especially for older people, now they're becoming more vulnerable in heat and illnesses. All of these individuals, these demographics, now face the anxiety compounded by the physical fragility that we are seeing due to the impacts of climate crisis. But it's not all doom. Climate anxiety, according to experts, is not necessarily bad, especially since it might be a trigger for collective action. It's a responsible response to an unreasonable crisis, especially for younger people who feel that they're not responsible for this crisis. And if channeled well into collective action, it can, in the form of empathy and collectively taking on climate action as a daily habit, it could lead to positive changes as well. So, how do we process this distress? And how do we help each other through it? That's what we're unpacking today with the help of a psychotherapist and a psychiatrist, helping us understand what climate anxiety is, how it manifests, and what can we do about it. Welcome back. Let's take a closer look at how all this is starting to feel on the ground. To understand what climate anxiety looks on ground, we spoke to Anand Lakhani, who's a psychotherapist with masters in neuroscience and psychology from King's College London. Talked about people facing trauma after heat waves, floods, and persistent fear that our planet is collapsing. Here's what she had to say.
So climate anxiety is not a recognized disorder as per the DSM yet. It's something that's only really been studied in the last decade, more so in the last 5 years, with younger people talking about it, coming out protesting and showing actual sort of shifts in their mental health directly as a result of it. So eco-anxiety or climate anxiety is essentially anxiety that's caused by changes in the climate and the ongoing sort of crisis around that. It has multiple facets to it. A couple of them that you mentioned, which is if natural disasters occur, there's PTSD as a result of it. If changes in people's lifestyles occur, such as not being able to walk outside, not being able to spend time out in nature, or just heat-related illnesses, cardiac, pulmonary issues that occur as a result of climate changes, then of course that's something that pertains to their health and is going to cause a lot of distress as well. And then there's just the general sense of existential dread that comes from what's going to happen to the planet, how people's children and grandchildren are going to be affected, how our lives are going to be affected, the existence of humans, what that looks like in the future. So these are very, very big questions that are now coming up and coming up quite rapidly.
As she points out, climate anxiety isn't about imagining danger. It's about living it. When you cannot walk outside without inhaling smog, or when your neighborhood floods every monsoon, it's not irrational to feel uneasy. The emotional toll shows up very differently across Pakistan. In rural areas, people often explain floods or droughts through divine intervention. But an emotional stress remains, even if it's not named climate anxiety. In urban areas, people feel visibly disrupted, outdoor routines are altered, physical health is strained, and memories of disaster stick.
So there is some research that shows there is a greater worry linked to climate change in India, in China, also in different socioeconomic groups, people who would be more vulnerable to changes In Pakistan, the research hasn't been done yet, but I would imagine that people who don't have access to or the luxury of buying air conditioners to battle increasingly hot summers, people who don't have the means to sort of protect themselves against environmental factors, they would be more affected. Um, there's not, as such, that much difference between younger and older people in terms of how their stress levels are showing up. But I think those differences do link. So they come in terms of how informed people are, where their political views lie. Ignorance would be a big factor in someone denying climate change and therefore not being worried about it.
These are not isolated fears. They affect young people deeply, particularly those informed about climate crisis or politically active.
Absolutely. I think PTSD from any natural disaster is a very, very reasonable response. It's not a disordered response. People are struck by just how fragile they are in the face of something so enormous, something so uncontrollable. And we live in a
Mm.
time where there's this constant kind of battle of the environment fighting back and people trying to overcome that on an individual basis. And I think it requires a little bit of humbling from us, a little bit more acceptance over what we cannot control.
So, according to Anam, trauma after disasters isn't categorized as a disorder. It's human, especially in cities like Karachi, where urban flooding is now occurring and a traumatizing event. But at the same time, psychotherapists are, hearing more about these cases, dealing with people who are dealing with this trauma, often also now categorizing it as PTSD. But there's hope and lies in solidarity, not solitude. Coming up, we turn to a psychiatrist to better understand what's happening inside our brains and bodies as the climate heats up. The body and mind are deeply connected. As our environment changes, our mental health is impacted too. To explore this, we spoke to psychiatrist Dr. Javed Akbardar and began by asking how extreme heat physiologically affects the human brain and mood.
Thank you so much for having me. That's a really good question. And I would say that there has been enormous studies about the physical effects that the temperature or any other climate change that has. But there are reported cases, not from the Pakistan, but from the other part of the world, that they have established that there are, as you have just mentioned, that there's a change in mood, the irritability is there, and that might come up with the changes in the mood, be it anxiety or depression. So many patients have also reported the post-traumatic stress disorder after the event, and there are so many other mood-related changes after this heat waves and heat temperature changes.
Around the world, now studies are showing that rising temperatures are linked with more mood swings, poor concentration, aggression, irritability, and even higher suicide risk. But what's happening neurologically?
I would say that there is a part of the brain that regulates the heat system in our brain. When it faces a gross change in the temperature, then it has to work like overtime at the cost of functions. And the most vulnerable population, be it the older people or the youngest one, they most of it. And even there are researchers that they face like cognitive changes, like the processing speed they get change, and even to an extent that in the international studies it has been seen that there has been a rise in the cases of Alzheimer's, also the dementias also. So the mood related changes, and there has been the serotonin and dopamine level also because of the heat. So that these are the hormones for the motivation and the mood. So all that mood related changes that are quite visible. And we have also witnessed, I would say, that there has always been a rise in the cases, number of cases when there are hot weathers, there mood related changes, be it in the cases of bipolar active disorders or the manic episodes. They are on the rise in such weathers.
As you've mentioned that, these cases are also reported more during these extreme episodes. Over the years, Has there been any effort to quantify or gather the statistics around it? For example, 10 years ago, the heat wave duration might be less number of days, or the recurrence was lower. But now, over the last 3, 4 years, we hear that heat waves occur every year. Basically, every May and June, there is a heat wave. So, is there any data that also shows that, 10 years ago, the cases were fewer and now they're also increasing?
I would say that's the unfortunate part. I haven't come across any study that is directly related for the heat waves, and we are mostly concerned about treating the things rather than preventing them from happening again. So I believe that's the downside, and work should be done on that area also.
There are reports from across the global south that psychiatric emergency visits increase during climate extremes. So we asked Dr. Javed if there are clear seasonal spikes in hospital visits, particularly for mental distress or aggression.
That's again the case that it's unfortunate that the awareness in this part regarding mental health aspect, that's again lacking, and people are not that much aware that they can directly link, be it the people, I would say most of the doctors, even I'm a bigger statement that I'm saying this, but I'm sure that most of the people are not aware of the direct impact of heat or the temperature to the people. So that's unfortunate.
Do patients or families even make the link that it might be, for example, extreme heat that is triggering those behaviors, increasing the symptoms and linking it with the weather?
There have been some studies in which we always talk about the stigma around the mental illness. But there are some studies when they were conducted, the people responded by the comment that they don't have the access to mental health facilities. So, as you have just mentioned, to the urban population, but when we see the rural population, the number of psychiatrists, yes, they are not as far required. And secondly, the access can be, I believe, we can use the technology now. That's possible, but I don't see a serious effort being done. I think it can be done beside the support of the government in that area. So we can use the AI or telepsychiatry that can help with the rural population, subject to the availability of the internet access and electricity and all those things. But yes, that's an unfortunate, but this is the only solution that we can reach to maximum population with the fewer resources that we have.
And are there examples around the world, basically in terms of policies, where governments have come up with such solutions?
Pakistan, as I have just seen that we are working towards the climate change, but I don't see any serious collaboration with the mental health team with that climate policies. I believe the collaboration should be there so that I don't know why it's there, because in the other part of the world, be it even if we look at the Bangladesh and their policies, they do have a complete thorough policy involving all stakeholders in it. And unfortunately, or maybe I'm missing, I'll again review it, but I don't see a serious effort that the collaboration there is an inclusion of mental health in it.
It's not just about the patients, the health system itself needs to adapt. Here's what Dr. Javed had to say.
With my little experience that I have seen over here, that we only work in silos. I work in the hospital setting. Policy making is I feel like it is somebody else's job. Then we need to work in collaboration. Then only we can think of preventive things. Right now, we are only dealing with the crisis. We face one crisis, we deal with it, be it in climate change or any other, and then we move forward and wait for the another crisis to come, and then we deal with it accordingly. So this provincial disaster management team or the climate change team or the health sector and the policymakers, they all should collaborate. There should discussion around it, and they should sit on table and discuss and come up with a certain solution, and only government can work on it in a bigger context.
Mm. And in terms of practicing therapy and psychoanalysis, do you see individuals coming up with, such associations or, bad memories associated with it? And what is the right way to actually deal with it, both, as dealing with as an expert in this field, but do we need policy level intervention to ensure that people, especially people who have seen like deep impact about it, how can they, go on, continue day to day their activities?
Absolutely. I think the only thing that can help long term is policy level intervention. What people bring in a lot of times is just this sense of helplessness, because individual action when it comes to climate change, things like recycling, things like switching off your lights or water conservation, it it feels so insignificant now in terms of carbon impact, in terms and this is with people who've done the research, who see what's happening, who've educated themselves. There's this growing sense of helplessness. There's this growing sense of alienation because most people around them are not as affected. They come across as quite apathetic. So the research shows that collective action acts as a very, very strong buffer against depression in this situation, against climate anxiety becoming this debilitating condition. Anxiety in this case is not a bad thing. When we normally deal with anxiety in the therapy space, we look at what's causing it, we look at our personal triggers that are being affected. This is different from dealing with other forms of anxiety in that it's not a perceived threat. It's a very real and growing threat. And to make it to make it an individual problem, to pathologize that is to gaslight a lot of people out of a problem that we all really need to be looking at. So collective action has been shown to help with depression related to climate anxiety. Um, it fosters a sense of social support, so people feel that they're not alone in battling this. It fosters a sense of being seen, being heard. It fosters a greater sense of hope as well, and it's a lot more likely to actually lead to some kind of change because the greater the number of people that are worried about this, the greater the chance that policymakers, people who have the authority to do something, will actually be driven to change.
And that I think brings me to my next question as well. Given that mental health and climate change are still not linked in a way in terms of both policy and looking at it from a public health lens, at least within Pakistan, no one takes it seriously. What can we really do to say that mental health, or at least in the post-disaster response, mental health should be a part of it? Because we don't see that happening. We've had massive floods in Sindh, and the response is that you reconstruct the houses and rehabilitate the population. But that rehabilitation does not necessarily mean working on their mental health and making sure people feel more secure in the new houses. So, how do we really bring together these two different issues and fields together?
I think that's a challenging question for a place like Pakistan where resources are limited. So the first thing that needs to be ensured is actually providing physical safety in terms of shelter, in terms of adequate resources. Mental health, I wouldn't say it's secondary, but you can't have conversations about mental health until basic needs have been addressed. So if once those things are provided, then there are ways of providing at least triage therapy, so sort of information gathering therapy, but that's done so in a sensitive and compassionate manner to assess what PTSD looks like in our population. Not a lot of conversations, not a lot of awareness on mental health in many areas here still. And so dealing with that as sensitively as possible. But I don't think just providing therapy is the solution. I think actually addressing basic needs is a bit more, it requires being given greater priority at this time.
Mental health can't be divorced from survival, but it also shouldn't be ignored until everything else is done. But what's the point of rebuilding a world if people don't feel safe in it? That's it for this episode of Front Seat to Climate Change. We'll keep asking hard questions about climate, about our systems, about ourselves. Until next time, I'm Daura Bhatt. Take care of each other and the planet.